Maren Holt was 58 years old, 11 days a widow, and when the lawyer finished reading and the papers stopped sliding across the walnut table, the whole of what remained to her in this world came to $67, and the keys to a building the county had already voted to knock down. The farm went to her husband's brothers, because it had been deeded into the family partnership longer ago than she had been married into it, and no court in the state was going to unwind 40 years of paper for a widow's feelings. The truck went with the farm. The savings had gone quietly, over 3 hard winters, into the machines and the medicine that bought Harlan one more season than the doctors promised. And what the medicine had not taken, the funeral took. Vernon and Grady Holt sat across from her in their church coats, not cruel, only finished with her. And when the reading was done, Vernon pushed one last envelope over the wood and said she ought to have something of Harlan's own, seeing how things had fallen out. Inside was a deed and a small ring of keys. The deed was to the old Flagstop Railroad depot out at Cedar Junction, 4 miles from town, where the passenger line had died 40 years back. A building the assessor carried on the books at a value of exactly 0. Condemned since spring. It was the one item on Harlan's side of the ledger that nobody wanted, and it had been the family joke for as long as she had been a halt. That quiet Harlan kept the keys to a station with no trains, and Grady could not help himself even then, with the funeral flowers barely wilted in her kitchen. 40 years playing station master to a dead track, he said. Somebody had to inherit the railroad. He laughed alone, and the lawyer looked at his hands. What none of them knew, not the brothers, not the lawyer, not the county, and least of all Maren herself, folding that worthless deed into her handbag because pride would not let her leave it lying on the table, was that inside the depot, behind a ticket window boarded over since before her hair went gray, there stood a locked oak drawer. And what was waiting in that ticket drawer would bring a whole town home before winter. Before this story is over, you will watch the men who took everything stand up in a county hearing and lose to a piece of paper older than all of them put together. And you will finally learn why a quiet man walked out of his own kitchen every evening of his married life at 6:30 and never once, in 36 years, told his wife where he went. If you are the kind of soul who likes a slow story told honest, settle in and put something warm in your hands. And take a moment to subscribe and tell me in the comments where in the world you are listening from tonight. Cedar Junction is a small place, and it does a small place good to know who is out there in the dark. The 640. Hold on to that number, because it matters more than anything else in this story. Every evening of their marriage, in planting weather and in blizzard, Harlan Holt pushed back his chair when the clock said 6:30, took his coat off the hook, and walked the fence-line road out to the depot, and at 6:40 exactly he would be standing on that cracked concrete platform. And sometime past 7 he would come home, hang the coat, and say nothing at all about it. When she was a young wife, Maren asked. Checking on the old place, he said, and kissed her temple, and that was the whole answer. When she was a less young wife, she followed him once, got halfway down the fence line in the dusk, felt foolish, and turned around. After that, she let it be. Every marriage has one locked room in it, her mother used to say, and if the worst thing in yours is a walk, count your blessings twice. So for 36 years she counted them, and the walk became like weather, a thing you plan around and stop seeing. She never learned, in all that time, that the 640 was not a habit. It was an appointment. He kept it the evening before he died, with the frost coming down. And the reason he kept it is the reason this story exists. Those last 3 years had emptied her out, and you cannot weigh what she found unless you know how little was left in her hands. Harlan's sickness was the slow kind, the kind that eats a farm before it finishes a man, and Maren had nursed him through all of it herself. She learned to count in hundreds, then in tens, then in ones, and sold her mother's china the second winter, and told him it was in storage. They had no children to call. Her own people were long gone, her sister 2 states away and struggling herself, and the town she had been born in had thinned out as rail towns do when the rail goes until the church could not keep a full-time preacher. Nobody in Cedar Junction was in a position to catch a falling widow. Most of Cedar Junction was falling itself. So when the reading was done and the brothers had gone off to look at their new farm, Marin sat a long while in her cold car outside the lawyer's office and did the arithmetic every poor woman in the world knows how to do. $67. A rented room over the feed store, paid through the end of the month, and one condemned depot that a salvage company, the lawyer mentioned, might pay a few hundred for if she signed the release and let them strip the copper and the old growth timber before the county's wreckers came. A few $100s was a bus ticket to her sister and a month of not starving. That was the plan she made in the car, and I will not pretend it was a bad one. Drive out. Look the place over once. Find the salvage man's paper and sign it. But there is a reason the old stories warn you about doors a dead man kept locked. Some doors are locked to keep a thing in. The door Marin was driving toward had been locked, faithfully for 40 years to keep a promise in. Stay with me, because within 3 days of turning that key, Marin Holt was going to stop being the woman this town felt sorry for and start being the woman it gathered around, and she did not see one bit of it coming. She drove out on a gray afternoon with the last of October in it, the kind of flat, cool light that makes everything look like a photograph of itself. The road to the junction had been good asphalt once and was patched gravel now, running string straight between shorn fields, and she met not one car the whole 4 miles. Then the elevator ruins went by on the left, and the old water tank on its rusted legs, and the road bent to follow the rail bed, and there it was ahead of her, and her heart did a thing she had not planned on. It sank. The depot was smaller than she remembered. In her memory, it was a proper station, white trim and a long platform, and men with wagons waiting on the freight. What stood at the end of the weedy gravel was a low wooden building the size of a generous shed, board and batten walls, that had been oxblood red in some other lifetime, and had weathered down to a color like an old scar, gray at the edges, peeling in long curls. The platform canopy sagged on tilted posts. The ticket window was blind behind gray boards. The station name board above the eave, the proud painted sign that had once told the whole prairie where it was, had bleached to a bare plank. Not one letter left on it. A sign that said nothing, nailed to a station that went nowhere. The rails curved past the platform edge and ran off both directions through dead grass and volunteer sumac, brown ribbons of rust with weeds standing up between the ties. On the door, under glass gone milky, hung the county's notice, and even from the car she knew the shape of the biggest word on it. Condemned, Marin got out and stood a long moment on the cracked lip of the platform, with her hands pushed down in the pockets of the olive canvas work jacket she had taken to wearing that fall, and the wind moved her gray-brown hair across her face, and she looked at the building her husband had loved better than he could ever explain. "This is it," she said out loud. "This is what he kept. 480 walks a year, near enough, for 36 years to this." She was not crying. She was too far past tired for that. She was doing the salvage math, copper and timber, and hating herself mildly for doing it, and that was the exact state she was in when she fitted Harlan's long iron key into the waiting room door, put her shoulder against the swollen wood, and stepped inside. And everything she thought she knew about the next 3 days ended right there on the doormat. Because the waiting room was swept, not broom swept last spring. Swept, the pine floor lay bare and clean, the boards worn pale in a path between the door and the ticket window like a trail through grass, and there was not a cobweb in the corners of the ceiling, and the 2 long benches, the good oak benches with the curved backs that the railroad built when railroads still meant to be permanent, were wiped free of dust and standing square to the walls as if the 6:10 from the east were running 20 minutes late and expected. The light came in soft through the one unboarded window, and it fell on the black iron stove in the corner, and Marin stood on the doormat with the salvage math dying quietly in her head and looked at that stove for a long time. Its door hung open. Inside, laid on a bed of clean ash, was a fire. Kindling split thin as fingers, cross-stacked the careful old way, dry cordwood angled over it, one struck match away from warmth. On the stovetop sat a blue enamel kettle, and when she lifted it, she found it full, and the water in it clean. Beside the stove, a field wood box. Beside the wood box, on a nail, a stub of candle and a tin of matches. Somebody was keeping this building ready. Not keeping it ready, and the difference between those two things ran down her spine like cold water. A caretaker sweeps. A caretaker does not lay a fire and fill a kettle in a condemned station on a deadline, as though at any hour of any evening some traveler might come in off a train that has not run since before that traveler was born, cold, and needing tea. Her first thought was a tramp, and she said hello into the quiet and got the particular silence of a truly empty building. Her second thought, and she was ashamed of it even as she thought it, was that the brothers were up to something. But Vernon and Grady had not swept a floor in their lives. Not once. Not anybody's. Her third thought was Harlan, and it would not go away. He had been dead 11 days. The kettle water was fresh. Someone had been here since. Someone was still doing whatever it was Harlan did, and doing it his way, and that meant the walks had never been a lonely man's habit at all. They had been a duty. And you do not hand off a duty on your deathbed unless the duty matters. She set the kettle down, and her eyes went across the waiting room to the wall beside the boarded ticket window, and that is when she saw the chalkboard. It was the arrivals board. Every depot had one once, a framed slate where the agent chalked the trains and their times so the whole waiting room could fret over them together, and every depot's board had been wiped or painted over or hauled off to an antique barn decades ago. Not this one. This one hung in its oak frame with the word arrivals carved along the top, and it was chalked full, and the hand it was chalked in stopped her breath. Small, square, upright letters, pressed hard. The hand that had signed every anniversary card in her dresser drawer. Harlan had written this board, and what he had written made no sense at all. Down the left side, a column of times, and every line the same time. 6:40, 6:40, 6:40, the whole slate down. And beside the times, where a board should say arriving from the east or delayed or on time, there were none of the old railroad words except one. Beside every 6:40, chalked in that patient square hand, the same two words. Still runs. The date chalked in the corner was 3 days before her husband's heart quit. The last thing on earth Harlan Holt had written, as far as she would ever know, was a timetable for a train that did not exist, and he had written it the way a man writes a fact. Now, a less stubborn woman might have walked back out to the car right then, and I want to be fair to you. Part of Marin wanted to. There is a kind of fear that has nothing to do with danger. The fear of learning that someone you buried was a stranger. If you know that fear, if you have ever sorted a dead person's belongings and felt them turning into somebody you never met, put a word in the comments tonight. Because Marin Holt is about to walk through the exact middle of it, and I think it would do her good to know she has company. And if this story has its hooks in you already, subscribe before we go on. What she finds behind the ticket window is worth staying for. I will promise you that much, and keep the rest. She stayed the night. There was nowhere else that made money sense, and besides, she could not stand the idea of leaving the place alone with its lit fire readiness and its impossible chalkboard, as if the building knew something, and might tell it to the dark if she left. She struck one match into the laid stove, and the fire took like it had been waiting all its life, and she drank hot water with nothing in it, sitting on the oak bench in the stove light with Harlan's coat over her knees, and around her the depot breathed the smell of coal smoke soaked 100 years into wood, and old paper, and cold iron, and under all of it, faint as a hand on her shoulder, pipe tobacco. His brand. She slept sitting up, the sleep of the utterly spent, and if anything came down the rails in the night, it ran through her dreams on soft wheels and did not wake her. Morning brought the agent's office. The door beside the ticket window was locked, but the third key on Harlan's ring fit it sweet as butter, and she stepped into the little room where her husband had spent the visible part of his secret life. A high desk with a slanted top under the boarded window. A stool worn to the shape of one particular man. A brass lamp, filled, a telegraph key on the sill, wires long dead, polished bright. And on the desk, square in the middle, the log. It was a ledger, the tall marbled kind, and it was the 4th or 5th volume, she guessed, because its spine said agent's log in ink gone brown, and the shelf above held others like it. She opened it where the ribbon lay. Columns ruled in pencil. In the first column, dates, in Harlan's hand, spanning years. In the second column, where a railroad log would name the train. Names, people's names. Names she knew the shape of the same fading town names that were penciled on the mailboxes of every empty farm from here to the river. And in the last column, where a log should record on time or late or annulled, one word, over and over, line after line, page after page, in that square, careful hand. Paid, no sums. No dollar column at all. Just a name, a date, and paid, hundreds deep. Whatever her husband had been keeping out here, he had kept books on it like a railroad man, steady as scheduled service. Marin stood at the desk with her finger under the last entry dated the week he died, a name she had never heard, marked paid, and she heard gravel crunch under a tire outside, and her heart went off like a partridge. She was a woman alone in a condemned building at the end of a dead road. She put the ledger in the desk, and she went out to the platform, and found a pickup the color of dried mud stopped in the weeds, and a big man in his 40s climbing out of it with a sack of stove coal on his shoulder like it weighed nothing. He stopped when he saw her, set the coal down slow on the platform boards, and took his cap off, which men his age mostly do not do anymore, and stood there turning it. "You'd be Marin," he said. "Mrs. Halt, I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sorrier than I know how to say it. You have the advantage of me," she said. Sonny Pruitt. He said it like it ought to mean something, and when it did not, he nodded at the sack. "I do the coal and the sweeping. Have done for some years now." Harlan liked the stove laid fresh and the kettle full. I didn't want it to lapse just because. He stopped. Just because. "You've been keeping this station," Marin said. "Swept, fire laid. A kettle of clean water. Mr. Pruitt, kept for what? The line's been dead longer than you've been alive." Sonny Pruitt looked at her a long, careful moment, the cap still going around in his hands, and what was in his face was not guilt and was not shyness. It took her a second to name it, and when she named it, it frightened her more than any trespasser could have. It was reverence. "He never told you," Sonny said, quiet, half to himself. "He really never told you. He said he never would, and I never believed him. He bent, picked up the coal sack, and straightened. Mrs. Halt, I run the garage in town. Anything you drive, I fix it free the rest of your life or mine, whichever quits first. But I'd sooner not be the one who tells you what your husband was doing out here. It ain't mine to hand you." He carried the coal past her, gentle as a man in church, and set it by the door, and then he said the thing that kept her in Cedar Junction. "Whatever you do about this place, ma'am, don't let anybody open that ticket drawer before you do. You open it your own self. Alone would be best." He put his cap on. It's the oak drawer, under the window, left of the till. The little brass key does it. He kept that key on his ring all 40 years, and I'd wager he's got it on there yet. He got in his mud-colored truck and drove back toward town, and Marin stayed on the platform until the sound of him was gone and there was only the wind in the dead grass again. Then she went in, and she found the little brass key on Harlan's ring, worn to the color of honey. and she stood in front of the boarded ticket window a long time before she could make her hand move. The oak drawer was where Sonny had said, under the sill, left of the rusted till. The brass key turned with a small dry click that she felt in her teeth, and she pulled the drawer open, and she looked down into 40 years of her husband's secret, and it was not gold, nor money either, and for a moment she could not understand what she was looking at all. Envelopes. The drawer was full of envelopes, standing on their edges as files stand, packed front to back, more than she could count in a glance, and each of them soft and furred at the corners from handling, and every one with a name written across the front in that square upright hand. Not addresses, names, first names, most of them, sometimes a first and a last, and beside each name a year. She lifted the front one out with 2 fingers as though it might come apart, and the name on it was Nell, dated one autumn only 6 years gone, and the flap was not sealed. She opened it. Inside was a single railroad ticket, the old cardboard kind, punched and stamped, and across the top in printed letters it read, good for 1 passage, and under that, in Harlan's hand, one word she already knew before she read it. Paid, and folded around the ticket, a half sheet of paper, and on the paper, in her husband's writing, these words. Nell. Girl, the seat is bought, and it stays bought. You do not have to be doing well to come back. You only have to come. The 6:40 still runs. Somebody will be on the platform. Marin sat down on the oak bench with the envelope in her lap, and the whole shape of it came up out of the dark at her all at once. 40 years of it. Cedar Junction was a dying rail town, and dying rail towns send their young people away, for the city, for the army, for a marriage, for shame, for a fight with a father that slams a door so hard it stays shut for a decade. The leaving is easy. It is the coming back that is hard, because coming back means admitting the city beat you, or the marriage failed, or you are broke and ashamed, and a proud person who is broke and ashamed will stay away forever rather than stand on a platform with no money for the fare and let the town watch them fail. Harlan Holt had understood that. Quiet Harlan, who never went past the 10th grade, had understood the one thing about his dying town the county and the railroad and even the church had missed. The door out was free. The door home cost money that the ones who needed it most did not have. So he bought it for them, every one of them. For 40 years, quietly out of a farmer's thin margins, Harlan Holt had bought a return ticket home for every young person who left Cedar Junction broke or beaten or angry, and he had put their name on an envelope and their fare inside it, and he had told them, somehow, some quiet, how she was only now beginning to guess at. The ones who would take it aside at the graduation, the ones he wrote to, the mothers he passed the word through, that no matter how far they fell, the seat was bought and it stayed bought, and the evening freight still ran, and somebody would be there to meet it. And when the passenger line died and the tickets stopped being sold, he had not stopped. She understood that now too, looking at the ledger word paid written beside a date only weeks old. Every time the railroad changed hands, every time the fare structure died and was replaced, Harlan had gone into town and to the county and turned his paid fares into whatever the new paper was, vouchers, credits, a standing arrangement with the one freight line that still crawled through at dusk to let a soul ride the caboose if the agent at Cedar Junction vouched for them. He had kept the promise good across 4 decades and 3 owners and the death of passenger service itself, one envelope at a time, and he had never told a living soul, and he had walked out here every evening at 6:40 because that was when the last freight came through, and he waited on the platform in case. In case. This was the evening someone stepped down off it holding one of his envelopes, so that no one would ever come home to a dark and empty station and think that they had come too late, and that no one wanted them. He was meeting the train. He had always been meeting the train. And now that he was gone there, was no one on the platform. And there were still envelopes in the drawer with the ink not yet faded, names of people scattered across the wide world who did not yet know that the man who left the light on for them had died. If you have made it this far into the story with me, you understand now why I asked you to settle in, and if it has meant something to you, take that moment now to subscribe. Because what those brothers did next, and what the town did back, is the part I most want you to hear. She read envelopes until the light failed, and then she lit the lamp and read more. She did not open them all. It felt like reading other people's mail, and in a way it was the most private mail in the county. But she read the outside of every one, and she came to know that drawer like a familiar face. There was a Cyrus 3 years back, and she thought of the vain boy who had left after the trouble with the sheriff and come home, everyone said, changed, and now ran the propane route and coached the peewee ball. There was an Alma, the nurse who had sat up 2 nights with Harlan at the end and would not take $1 for it, who had left at 19 swearing she would never be back and had come home at last to bury her mother and simply stayed. There was a name that was Sonny Pruitt's own, dated more than 20 years gone, and she understood now why the Pruitt boy had come home from the city inside a year with his tail down and had opened a garage, and had swept a dead man's station every week for reasons the town had been too polite to ask about. Sonny had come home on Harlan's ticket. That was the debt he was paying, coal sack by coal sack, and it was why he could not be the one to tell her. It was too much his own. There was a reverend's name, and the year beside it made her breath catch, because it was the year the young preacher's daughter had run off and broken her father's heart from the pulpit, and Marin had assumed, the whole town had assumed, that the girl was gone for good. But here was her name on an envelope in Harlan's hand, seat bought, waiting. And so it went, name after name. A quiet map of every prodigal Cedar Junction had grieved and given up on, and besides so many of them, in the ledger, that word. Paid, not all of them had come home. Some envelopes were thick and untouched, seats bought for people who had never used them, and those were the ones that made Marin cry at last, sitting alone in the lamplight, because each unopened envelope was a person Harlan had waited for on the platform, evening after evening, year after year, who never came. He had waited for them anyway. That was the whole of the man. He had stood in the cold for the ones who might never step down, because the not coming was theirs to choose, and the being ready was his to give. That was Thursday. On Monday, the brothers came back, and they did not come alone. She heard the vehicles first, 2 of them, and by the time she came out onto the platform, Vernon and Grady were already climbing down from Grady's good new truck, and behind them a low black car had pulled up, and out of it stepped a soft, heavy man in a good coat, with a leather folder under his arm, and the particular easy smile of a person who has never once in his life been the one to lose. He came up the platform steps ahead of the brothers, hand already out. Mrs. Halt. Dale Kestrel, Kestrel Salvage and Reclamation. I am truly sorry to intrude on you in your time of grief. He had a card out, somehow, in the hand that was not shaking hers. Your brothers-in-law tell me you're the owner of record on this structure now. That's a lucky thing for you, and I mean that kindly, because I'm here to turn this liability into money in your pocket. Is that right? Marin said. That is exactly right. He gestured at the depot, at the whole sagging ruin of it, with the fondness of a man appraising a carcass. The county's got her condemned. Demolition's on the calendar for the fall, and when the county wrecks her, you get nothing, you might even get billed the disposal. Now, my company buys the structure and the right-of-way easement off you before that happens. We take the timber, this is old-growth hardpine, worth real money to the right restorer, we take the copper and the brass and the rail steel, and we clear the parcel. You sign today, I write you a check today. $4,000, Mrs. Halt, for a building the government values at nothing and is about to charge you to lose. $4,000. To a woman with 67, it was not a number, it was a rope thrown to someone going under. Vernon was watching her face for the exact moment it landed, and she saw him see it land, and she saw him smile. "Be smart, Marin," Vernon said. "Harlan's gone. This place was his foolishness. God rest him, and it's a stone around your neck now. Take the man's money. There's a cut in it for the family, too, seeing as we brokered it so everybody comes out ahead. You get your bus ticket to your sister, and then some." "A cut for the family," Marin repeated. "Standard on the easement," Kestrel said smoothly. "The right-of-way runs across the old partnership ground on both ends, so your brothers-in-law's signatures come into it. We've all agreed in principle. You're the last one, and the easy one, I'd have thought." And there it was, laid out on the cold boards in front of her, the whole of it. The brothers had not given her the depot out of any late mercy. They had given it to her because it was condemned and worthless and a burden, and now that a buyer had appeared, they meant to broker it out from under her and take the easement money off the partnership land while she took the crumbs and was grateful. She looked at the folder under Kestrel's arm, and at Vernon's smile, and at the drawer she knew was behind the boarded window with 4 decades of paid promises standing on their edges inside it, and something that had been numb in Marin Holt since the graveside came fully awake. "No," she said. Kestrel's smile did not move, but something behind it did. "I understand it's emotional. Take a day." "I don't need a day. This building is not for sale. The copper in it stays where it is, and the ground under it will never be sold, and you may tell your restorer the heart pine is spoken for." Her voice did not shake, and that surprised her more than it surprised them. "It's holding up a roof, and it's going to go on doing it." Grady laughed, the same bark he had loosed over the funeral flowers. "Holding up a roof for who, Marin? There's nobody out here. There's nobody coming. It's a dead station on a deadline, and you're a widow with no money playing the same game he played. God help you, you married the man and caught the sickness." He spread his hands to the empty rails, the empty road, the whole abandoned 4 miles. "Who is this roof for?" And from the bottom of the platform steps a man's voice said, "For me." They all turned. Sonny Pruitt stood at the foot of the steps, in his shop coveralls, with grease worked into his knuckles, and he had come so quiet on foot up the railbed that none of them had heard him, and his face was not a mechanic's face just then. It was something older and harder set. "It was for me," Sonny said again, and he came up 1 step. 19 years old, I was, and I went to the city to be a big man, and I lost every dollar and a good bit of my dignity besides, and I was sleeping in a bus depot too ashamed to call home. And a letter found me. No lecture in it. Just a ticket, bought and paid, and a note said the seat stays bought. Come when you're ready. Somebody'll be waiting when you come. His jaw worked. "I came home on the 6:40 on a Tuesday in the rain, mister, and there was a man standing on this platform in a coat with a lantern, and he didn't say one word about where I'd been. He just picked up my bag and said, 'There you are.' Like I'd been expected. Like there'd never been a doubt I'd come." He looked at Grady. "So don't you tell me there's nobody out here. I'm somebody. And I ain't the only one." There was a silence on the platform then that even Kestrel did not try to fill. But feeling is not a deed, and Marin could have lost right there. A dead man's kindness is no legal defense against a condemnation order, and both Vernon and Kestrel knew it, and both let her have her moment on the platform because the paperwork was on their side. The building was condemned, the demolition was scheduled. All Kestrel had to do was wait, buy the easement from the brothers, and let the county knock the depot down for him. She had won the argument and was about to lose the war, and she lay awake that night knowing it. Somewhere past 2 in the morning she went back to the high desk and began going through Harlan's papers, not for comfort now, but for a weapon, and that is where she found the thing that changed everything. It was in the bottom drawer of the desk, in a japanned tin box under the spare lamp wicks, wrapped in oilcloth. the original deed. Not the county's photocopy that Vernon had handed her, but the first deed, the founding one, drawn up when the railroad platted the town site and built the stop, dated the spring of 1911. And it was not a simple deed. It was a grant with a condition written into its body in the ornate hand of a railroad clerk 100 years dead, and Marin read the condition 3 times by lamplight with her heart going harder each time. The parcel and the structure, it said, were granted to serve as a public depot and station house for the convenience of the traveling public. And the grant would hold, this was the phrase, so long as an agent duly keyed and appointed shall keep and serve the stop. So long as an agent keyed and appointed shall keep the stop. The building could not simply be condemned as derelict and cleared, not while a keyed and appointed agent was keeping it and serving it, because the moment there was no agent the land reverted, but the moment there was an agent, the depot had a legal reason to stand that predated the county, the salvage company, and all of them together. And Harlan had kept the keys for 40 years. Harlan had been the agent. The question that kept her awake the rest of that night was whether the agency had died with him, or whether, somehow in his quiet 40 years ahead way, he had thought even of this. She was at the county recorder's office when it opened. The recorder was a spare, precise woman named Odessa Flint, who had held the office 30 years and knew where every body in the county was buried, most of them on paper. Marin laid the 1911 deed on the counter and asked her the question, and Odessa Flint read the condition clause with her glasses down her nose. And then she looked up over them at Marin for a long moment, and then, without a word, she went back into the vault. She was gone a long time. When she came back, she was carrying a slim folder gone yellow at the edges, and she set it on the counter and opened it, and turned it so Marin could read. "Harlan Holt came in to see me 19 years ago," Odessa said quietly. "I remember it because he wore a tie, and I'd never seen him in a tie. He'd read this same clause you're pointing at, or had it read to him, and he asked me what would keep the depot standing after him. And I told him the same thing that Deed just told you. An appointed agent, keyed, of record. So he filed this." She tapped the folder. "An instrument of deputation. It appoints and keys a deputy agent to keep and serve the Cedar Junction stop to take effect on his death, recorded and sealed 19 years ago and never amended." She looked up. "Do you want to know the name of the deputy agent he appointed, Mrs. Holt? Or have you already guessed it?" Marin's mouth had gone dry. "Say it anyway." "Marin Holt," said Odessa Flint. He keyed you as agent 19 years ago and never told you, and by the terms of a deed drawn in 1911, so long as you keep that station and serve that stop, the county cannot clear the land and no salvage company can touch a board of it. You are the station master of Cedar Junction, ma'am. You have been for 11 days and did not know it." She took her glasses off. "Your husband was the most foresighted man I ever processed paper for, and I have processed paper for judges." The hearing was the following Wednesday. A condemnation review that Kestrel and the brothers had expected to be a formality, and that Marin, armed now, had petitioned to make into something else. And here is where the story stops being about a building and becomes, as the best of these stories always do, about a town. Because Marin had spent the days between doing one thing. She had taken the drawer of envelopes and the ledger, and she had begun to make calls and write letters to the names she knew and the names Sonny knew and the names Odessa Flint could put a last address to, and she had told them, simply, that Harlan Holt had died, and that the station he kept was going to be torn down, and that if the depot had ever meant anything to them, there was a hearing on Wednesday. She did not know if anyone would come. That is the truth. She drove to the county building on Wednesday morning, fully expecting to stand alone in front of a board with a 100-year-old deed and a dead man's foresight, and hope it was enough. But when she came around the corner into the hearing room, she stopped in the doorway, because the room was full. It was full of people she half knew and people she had never met at all. People who had driven in from 3 states, a propane man, and a nurse, and a peewee ball coach, a woman in scrubs, and a man in a good suit, and a young mother with a baby on her hip. And standing near the front, thinner and older and gray now at the temples but unmistakable, the preacher's runaway daughter, home for the first time in 15 years. They had come. They had come home one more time, for the depot, and for the man, and for her. Sonny Pruitt stood at the back by the door with his cap in his hands, and when Marin caught his eye, he only nodded, as if to say, "Told you, ma'am." I ain't the only one. The county attorney read the condemnation. Kestrel's lawyer spoke about hazard and blight, and the public interest in clearing derelict structures. Vernon sat with his arms folded and would not look at her. And then the chairman asked if the owner of record wished to speak, and Marin Holt stood up, a 58-year-old widow in an olive canvas work jacket, and she laid the 1911 deed and Odessa Flint's certified instrument of deputation on the table, and she said her piece plain. "I'm the keyed and appointed agent of the Cedar Junction stop," she said. "By this deed, that's what keeps the building standing, and I mean to go on keeping it and serving it, so there's nothing here to condemn and nothing here to sell." But I didn't ask these folks to drive across 3 states to hear me argue paper. I asked them here so you could see what this building is, because you have got it written down as derelict. And you are wrong, and every soul in this room is the reason you're wrong. She turned to the room. My husband kept this station for 40 years, and I only found out last Thursday what he was keeping. Some of you know better than I do. I'd take it kindly if you'd tell it. And one by one, they stood up and told it. The nurse, Alma, stood first, and her voice shook and then steadied. I left at 19 and swore I'd die before I came back to this town. 2 years later, I was broke and pregnant and alone in a city that didn't want me, and a ticket came in the mail with no return address and a note that said the seat stays bought. Come when you're ready. I threw it away. I was proud. She stopped. I fished it back out of the trash at 2 in the morning 3 weeks later. I came home on the 6:40. There was a man on the platform with a lantern who carried my bag and never asked me one single question, and I had my daughter in this county with my mother holding my hand, and my daughter is a nurse now too, and she came today. She's right there. Derelict. You call it derelict. It's the reason my whole family exists. The propane man, Cyrus, stood. I did something at 19 I'm not going to say out loud in front of the children. I figured this town was done with me for good, and I'd made my peace with never coming back. The ticket found me in a place I'm not proud of being. Note said, "You don't have to be doing well to come home, you only had to come." He looked at his boots. "I coach ball now. 40 kids. Every one of them's got a home to come back to, and it's because a man I barely knew decided I got to have one." They stood, and they told it, and the room went from a hearing to something the chairman had no gavel for. The preacher's daughter rose last, and her voice came out very quiet. "The note found me the week I decided the world would go on better without me in it," she said. "It wasn't the sermon that brought me home. It was a ticket, and 4 words wrote on it in that square hand. Come as you are." She pressed her lips together. I got to hold my father's hand before he passed. Just in time. Every year I've had since, that building bought me. A man told how he'd come home on the freight caboose after the ticket stopped, vouched for by an agent at Cedar Junction he'd never met, and learned only today whose voice on the phone had vouched. One after another, the town Harlan Holt had quietly refused to let die, stood up in a county hearing room, and testified that they were alive and home and whole because of a condemned building and the man who swept it, and by the time the last of them sat down there, were board members wiping their eyes, and Kestrel's lawyer had quietly closed his folder, and Vernon Holt was staring at the table like a man watching a fortune he had already spent evaporate off it. The board did not even recess. The chairman conferred left and right in whispers, and then he struck the condemnation from the record and entered the Cedar Junction depot as an active keyed station under its founding grant, agent of record Marin Holt, and a board member whose own cousin had come home on a ticket moved that the county designated a historic heritage stop. The room did not cheer. It was past cheering. People simply reached for one another, strangers who were not strangers, all of them children of the same quiet man's stubbornness, and Marin stood at the front and thought, he did all of this, and never once told me, and I buried him thinking his walks were a foolishness. But the story is not quite over, because there was one more envelope in that drawer, and I have not yet told you whose name was on it. She found it that night, back at the depot when she went to put the deed away and, on an impulse she could not have explained, pulled the drawer clear out to the stops, further than she had before. And there, fallen down flat behind the standing files where it must have slipped or been laid to wait, was one more envelope, older than the rest. The paper gone soft as cloth and yellow as a moth's wing, and the name written across the front of it, in Harlan's square young hand, was hers. Marin, and the year in the corner was the year they married, their wedding week. It had been in this drawer for 36 years. Her hands were not steady when she opened it. Inside was a ticket, the old cardboard kind, punched and stamped and paid. Good for one passage home. And folded around it a note, the ink of it faded almost to brown, in the hand of a young man she had married a lifetime ago and only tonight, it seemed, truly met. She read it aloud to the empty waiting room, because it did not feel right to read it only to herself. Marin, it said. You gave up your whole life to come out here to a nothing town and marry a quiet man, and I know some days you'll wonder why you did. So I bought you a ticket the same as all the others, and I'm putting it where you'll find it someday when you need to know this. The seat is bought. It stays bought. Any day this place or this life gets to be too much, the 6:40 runs east at dark, and the fare is paid, and no one, not even me, will think the less of you for going. I never wanted you to stay because you were stuck. I wanted staying to be a thing you chose, free, every single day, the way I chose you. The station's not a prison, Marin. It's a door left open both directions. The 6:40 still comes. Somebody should be on the platform. I hope it gets to be you a good long while, but only if you want it. That's the whole of what I ever wanted. Your Harlan. And Marin Holt, who had not wept at the graveside 11 days into this story, sat down on the worn oak bench in the lamplight with her husband's 36-year-old promise open in her lap, and she wept at last, and there was more than grief in it. He had not walked out every evening to escape her. He had walked out to hold a door open for the whole world. And he had bought her, first of all of them, the freedom to walk out that same door any day she pleased, so that every morning she stayed had been a gift she gave and not a sentence she served. The 6:40 was never a train. It was a promise that home stays lit. She understood at last why he kept that platform. He was not waiting for a train. He was being the somebody who was there when it came. She stayed. Of course she stayed, and so did Harlan know she would, 36 years ago, though he gave her the going anyway. Because a home you cannot leave is not a home. It is a trap with a kind face. Marin Holt became the station master of Cedar Junction in truth, and the depot got its oxblood paint back and its name board lettered fresh. And Sonny Pruitt fixed the canopy posts so they stood up straight for the first time in her memory, and the 6:40 freight began, by an arrangement Marin made herself, to slow and sometimes stop, in case. Because there were still envelopes in that drawer. There were still names out there in the wide world, of Cedar Junction's children who had left broke, or ashamed, or angry, and not yet found their way back. The drawer stays locked. The tickets stay paid. Marin keeps the promise now, as he kept it, and she has started a new envelope or two of her own, in her own hand, for young ones leaving this year. Because a town does not stay alive by holding on to the ones already home. It stays alive by keeping the light on for the ones still out. And every evening, in planting weather and in blizzard, at 6:30, Maren Holt takes her coat off the hook and walks the fence-line road out to the depot, and at 6:40 she is standing on the platform when the freight comes through the dusk, watching to see if anyone steps down. Mostly no one does. She stands there anyway. That is the whole of the thing her husband taught her without ever saying a word of it out loud, and I think it is worth carrying home with you tonight, whoever you are and wherever you are listening from. The most valuable thing a person can leave behind is not money, nor a building, nor even a name carved somewhere in stone. It is a door left open and a light left on, and the quiet, faithful work of being the somebody who is standing there when the lost ones finally come home. You need not be rich to leave that, nor be remembered for it. Harlan Holt did it 40 years in secret and would have been content to be forgotten. Someone should be standing there to meet it. It might as well be you. So let me leave you with the question Maren asked herself on the bench that night, and let me leave it with you to sit with. If you knew that somewhere out there, someone you love had left broke or ashamed or angry, and was staying away only because they believed the door had closed behind them, would you be the one to send word that the seat is still bought, that the light is still on, that they can come home just as they are? Or would you wait, as most of us do, and hope they somehow already know? Tell me in the comments which one you'd be, and tell me where you're listening from tonight, and if this story warmed something in you, subscribe and stay a while, because there is always another lantern to light, and another ledger to keep, and another quiet soul out here in the dark whose story deserves to be told the slow way, and told true.